So, in conversation, can we welcome Richard Susskind and Sir Tim Berners-Lee?
Thank you, Jude. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be here with you. Tim, apparently I have to inquire into your mind over the next hour or so, as Jude put it.
That's what she said.
I thought we should start by going back to 1989, and March 1989, when you were writing a paper that turned out to be of so great significance to all of us. It was an amazing year. It was the year the Berlin Wall came down. Madonna was #1 in the charts, as she was at that time very often. The Hubble telescope had not yet been launched, neither had the Human Genome Project. But that year, the first GPS satellite was put into orbit. Microsoft launched that year Microsoft Office for the first time. Nintendo's Game Boy came out, and Sky TV was launched. So it was an amazing year. And I'm imagining you as a marginally more youthful individual, and useful perhaps, sitting at your next box. Is that not right? Because Steve Jobs was on sabbatical from Apple and had developed the next machine, and that was the machine you were using. So you're writing a paper on information management. Tell us about it.
Okay, so I was working at CERN, which is a wonderful place. If you haven't been there, you should go there. I was working there as just a software engineer. I did a physics degree, but I wasn't a physicist. I was just there in order to help them make the whole thing work, and the whole thing work by software. So I found it just frustrating, even from the first time when I had a 6-month stint there as a consultant back in 1980. I had noticed that to be able to contribute, I had to write some code which would talk to various bits of equipment. I had to know how the other code worked on it. I had to understand how the equipment worked. And all the people who contributed to CERN, they came from different countries. They had different attitudes, which is wonderful. They used different computer systems. They used different computer languages. And so the documentation they had about their systems was all on different machines. So if you really wanted to go and look something up, you basically had this chase which involved tracking down the person, and then having found that, they'd say, oh yes, it's all in the documentation on such and such a machine. So you'd have to log on to that machine. You could connect remotely from one machine to the other, because this internet thing had just spread across the America and was just touching CERN. So the machines were connected together, but when you logged onto it, you'd have to then learn another, for each machine, a different obscure documentation system. You have to learn how to find your way around it, find the things. And you'd be hard-pressed to actually get the file back, and if you were lucky enough to be able to get the file back onto your own machine, you probably wouldn't be able to read it anyway, because it'd be written in some format for goodness knows what word processor. So there's a huge amount of diversity there. In a way, the diversity of CERN is one of its charming features. It's great that people did have different attitudes, different ideas, different computers. But what I felt we needed, was the ability to just look at all those documents as though they were part of one system. So that was the idea. And I talked to people, and I just thought it would be a kind of good idea. I could kind of see how to do it, and I talked to people about the idea in general. And at one point they said, you should write that up. So I wrote it up, and that was the thing to talk about. I pushed it around. I wrote it in March 1989, and I announced we were really saying this is the sort of the start of the project. But not a lot happened. In fact, next year somebody said again, what about this hypertext project? And I said, well, they said, you should write a memo. I said, I did. You should send it to me. I think I did. So, well, send it to me again. So I sent it to a bunch of people, the usual suspects again, and I put the date on it was March 1989, May 1990, just to rub it in, but I could have read it before. And again, nothing really happened until my boss let me just sort of write all the software, get a next machine, which was a wonderful development tool, and build it. Mike Sendell, really, we owe a lot to Mike because he let me work on the thing, even though he couldn't really justify it by any sort of formal way that the CERN worked. Unfortunately, he died about 10 years later when Peggy, his wife, Peggy Rimmer, went through his things, that she found a copy of this memo, and in the corner he had written in pencil, vague but exciting. And so I'm just grateful he didn't think it was exciting but vague. So that's his copy is.
Was there a Eureka moment? Did you suddenly, at any stage, think, "Wow, this could transform the way we look at information, look for it, the way we play games, the way we communicate, collaborate"? Or did this evolve over time?
There's lots of answers to that. One is that I'm a programmer. I spend all my days thinking, wow, this could transform, Every time you start writing a bit of code, you think, oh, this could really transform the world. And a lot of times it doesn't, so it's good to celebrate the times when it does. But in fact, after a while, you get used to the fact that it probably, they probably won't. It may or may not work at all. I'd had a really cool thing which I called Tangle, it actually became a horrible tangle and it didn't work. And there were lots of things which I'd done which didn't work. And things I developed along the hypertext way before the internet, which weren't really networked, but were cool, and I'd used them, but they hadn't sort of spread. So I was aware. So in fact, it wasn't. That Eureka moment, I think, is a big myth. Mm. In fact, looking back and talking to other people, I think that the way your brain works it works when you do your creative things. It seems to me that your brain is putting together different pieces of a puzzle, and it's all those bits of the solution to the problem you have are things that you've come across in the past, and they're all up there jumbled around in your head. And there's a process which works behind the scenes, which puts them together. And sometimes people, you may start realizing how they fit together when you're going for a run, when you're going for, when you're having a shower or something. But in fact, I think the process is very long, and it does involve letting your brain be to work by itself. But because it's working by itself, when somebody asks you, how did you come up with that idea? If anybody answers that question, they're lying because they don't know. Because, it was my brain came up with it. And because unlike a computer, we don't know. Our brains can't look into what our brains are doing. So I think it was just a lot of, the fruits of a lot of previous work I'd done, and a lot of things, which had happened to programs I'd written, which happened to have the right ingredients, really, and the idea of hypertext, which had crept into the computing world and things like that before that.
So to what extent, though, as part of all of this, do you attribute your parents, who were both very early involved in computing? Presumably within your family home, there was an orientation towards technical issues.
Well, yeah, Mum and Dad met building, sort of working on the Mark I, the Franti Mark I.
And that was just about the first commercial computer,
It was the first commercial computer selling in this country, and some people have said it's the first computer which was sold commercially, as opposed to within the government. It was developed at Manchester University. Those days were clearly really exciting for them, and I think it was looking back, it was really exciting for computing in general. People made the first Turing machines. They made the first computers which were sufficiently powerful to be able to emulate other computers, and therefore basically do anything you could imagine.
But you, as a kid, did they bring you home bits of computer to play with?
Reels of paper tape, which we generally threw around the room, which was lots of fun. They brought home the idea that mathematics is everywhere. Mm. They were mathematicians, so you would be amazed what conversations would suddenly, pie would suddenly crop up in the middle of cooking, about cooking in the kitchen and things. But so they talked a lot about math, and they were excited about computing clearly. And also, my father was writing speeches for Basil Franti, who ran the company, trying to explain to people how computers worked, and so I saw some of his efforts to do that, including building a little computer out of water jets intersecting with each other. which was as an explanatory thing.
And you studied physics, though, so physics, maths, parental background, strongly oriented towards computing. And whose work do you look back on, for example, in hypertext? Are there any individuals whose work you regard as definitive, the shoulders
Well,
you stood on?
I didn't study them. Okay, I didn't study computer science, and a lot of the people in those days, a lot of people hadn't done computer science. In fact, Ted Nelson had defined the word hypertext, and the idea of clicking on something to get into somewhere else was really fairly. By that time, I didn't meet him for a long time until I deliberately looked him up, but the ideas that he'd had got into computer systems. So when you were using your word processor and you clicked, and you used the help system, then you could click on links within that. So people were used to clicking on highlighted text and ending up somewhere else. So that's really.
And so you brought that together. The web in its very early form was born. Was there any sense in you at the time of wanting to make a killing financially out of this? Because presumably the dot-com era came at some stage later, but were you ever inclined to think, gosh, this is something we could patent, or maybe it would be CERN would patent it? Or very early on, did you feel this is actually the way you might be able to contribute more widely to the way people work?
You've got to remember that the attitude of the people who were developing the internet, they met at the Internet Engineering Task Force meetings, which would be various places in the world three times a year, and I went to a few of those. And online, protocols were discussed at online discussion groups, and the whole tenor of the work was excitement. It was a huge amount of excitement about the opportunities that we've got in developing new protocols and connecting computers together. There was, there was absolutely and everybody was building on each other's work. So even though the word open source hadn't been invented, but that was the way people worked. It was just like a big club of people doing this really cool thing, collaborating together. So the spirit of international collaboration, very, very open, was really important. Now, meanwhile, what I did want to do is I wanted this thing to take off. So I did get a chance to work on it, but then there was just me. I had one web server, one web browser running on the same platform, on the same machine, talking to themselves across the internet. And
sorry, can I interrupt? Was that the machine? I think I saw an article about it in the paper recently, where you had a little sign in the back of it not to switch it off because that was acting as the server as well. Was that right?
Yes. So later on, I had to move. My desktop machine became a server. It became info.cern.ch was it was the first web server, and then later on, I moved it into the computer center with the hope that it would continue running over Christmas. In fact, I plugged it into the wrong plug. Well, I should have left it in the office because they made a big deal of turning the computer center off to save energy. But they actually left the office's plug turned on, so over Christmas. So that was it.
And that machine is in some museum somewhere with your handwritten.
It has a sticker on it.
Your handwritten notes.
This is server, don't mitts off. Don't. Yeah.
And we're coming to men's way. Last week I was in Minneapolis, and I was giving a talk, and after the talk, this old gentleman came up to me, and I'd been talking about the web, and he said, "I'm connected to the web." And I thought he meant he was a user of the web, and so I said, that's very interesting. And he said, "No, I'm connected to the web." And he explained to me that he had a pacemaker, who was in his late 80s, and there was real-time monitoring of the state of his heart by some central hospital facility and so forth. And it just struck me at that moment just how far we've come, that human beings are connected. What sense did you have of the potential in the early days? Were you seeing it in the early days as a phenomenal document sharing, document management system? And are you as amazed as everyone else when new applications unfold and when new developments are launched?
So I suppose my vision really was for this collaborative hypertext web that we would spend our time sort of really communicating through. So on the one side, I could never imagine the huge amount of, the result of all the creativity which people put into building websites. That was obviously just, continues to be a tremendous delight. On the other side, part of what I wanted, the idea, this idea of you solve problems in your head by different bits of the solution coming together through some process. So one of the things I really wanted to do, I knew I was collaborating with people even before the web. The other software projects were collaborating with people who worked in different places, had a limited amount of time to contribute. Maybe a student would come over the summer, or somebody would have just 10% of their time to be able to help code out one of my projects. So the idea was that we could use this web as a sort of as a medium which would allow us to understand each other's thinking. The idea was we'd put in everything we knew, everything we thought about the project. When we had a meeting, you put in the meeting and you'd have links back to all the documents that we mentioned in the meeting, and links to where the decisions came from. So anybody else joined the team, they could just immerse themselves in the web, and they wouldn't need to be briefed because they would be briefed by the web. And as they contributed, they would just contribute to adding to the web. So the idea would be the project would live in the web, and people would be sort of plugged into it in a sort of equilibrium with it. So that if the web knew anything that I didn't, I'd very quickly find out. And if I thought of something which it didn't know, I would be able to put it in there, and then so it would automatically get into other people's brains. And sort of the one goal that which I would have really liked to have achieved was to have been able to have this sort of enhanced collaborative intelligence, where when you have a really big problem to solve, then it gets spread across the web, and everybody's, each person's brain is covering a certain amount of it, and together we can really we become have a very, very powerful collaborative tool. And we're not quite there yet, but keep coding. Let's.
What I wanted to talk about now was two things, really. On the one hand, what's worrying on the web and what's worrying you about the web. But to start slightly more positively, what excites you about the way the web has evolved, and when you get up in the morning, you bounce out of bed, what makes you pleased, what excites you, inspires you about the current state of the web?
What worries me?
No, if we start with what makes you happy, first of all.
Okay, what's happening?
We'll turn into negative time rather soon.
Is still the spirit of collaboration, international, crossing cultural boundaries, people bringing their creative ideas, now they're building sort of new software platforms, new JavaScript libraries and things that run on top of the open web platform, because the web's come a long way since it was sort of static HTML. But so that now we have lots of huge sites where people share sort of open source software on an industrial scale. Yeah. So I think that for a developer, it's a great environment to be in, because you can just contribute as little or as much as you like, and you will find that if people may come along and just help do that. So I think that spirit is which there was all those years ago, we still have.
Coming over the horizon in terms of new technologies and new techniques, you've spoken in the past a lot about the semantic web. You might talk about that, or any other techniques that you think are really going to reshape or redirect the evolution of the web.
So the semantic web is something where I talked about a lot a few years ago. It was interestingly, it was shot down by a lot of the incumbents. A lot of sort of people in IT felt that it was because it was put forward as an enterprise integration.
Could you maybe give just a 10-second summary of what you were meaning by that?
The semantic web is computers is putting data out there which machines can understand, machines can process. It's not rocket science. The semantic web is about, for example, something I talk. When you have a calendar online, you can use all kinds of different tools to look at your calendar, and that's because the calendar is stored in a way that the machine can understand it, so it can give you a day view, it can give you a month view, and so on. So the machine sort of understands to some extent how to process it, rather than the calendar just being like a PDF document. So there are some things like that, but in general, an awful lot of stuff out there is not machine readable, it's not machine processable. Supposing all of the data you deal with in business life, in personal life, bank statements, for example, your fitness data, all of that were in a form that the machines could help you process, machines could join it together and come to, machines could join it together and sort of could infer things from it that they didn't understand before. That's, it's long been something which computer scientists have been, doing and wanting to do. But it was, in fact, it was, I felt it was a bit shot down by some incumbents, but then what happened was that we rebranded it largely as linked data. And the word, and linked data is sort of people kind of get. We just say it's linked, data. Linked data is linked just like web pages are linked. Oh, yeah, so people get that, and they go out and they and now the linked data world has taken off, and there's a huge amount. If you look at the open linked data cloud, there's a huge amount of linked data out there. People don't call it semantic web because people are still sort of feel a little bit burned that in some companies, the people in control frowned on the idea of semantic web. But we have this massive amount of linked data, and it's a really, and I found it when I'm coding, I find it's just a really nice way to work. It's just a really powerful way to. So okay, that's basically a semantic web. If I do everything I do for myself, I use that technology.
How much time do you spend, incidentally, programming? Do you still enjoy writing code? You were mentioning.
I do. Yeah. I mean, yes. Obviously, I've got students at Southampton, students at MIT who are doing things I think are really interesting. Every now and again, though, I just think, I'm not sure if I can be able to explain exactly what I want without just coding it myself. And I do get a kick out of it. It's just a good way to
recreational.
Yeah.
A lot of the focus over today's activities have been on the more worrying sides of the web, that while it is the most remarkable human creation, there are many aspects of it that cause deep concern, and I know you yourself have all manner of worries, and I thought we should spend quite a bit of time and link this to discussions about the need for perhaps a Magna Carta of digital rights or a digital bill of rights and so forth. But I asked you what got you excited as you went about your daily business. I want to ask you now what worries you most about the web.
Well, people have asked me that question for the last 25 years, and my answer has always been that the main worry is that it should be end up being completely controlled by some organization. So initially I said, well, that depends which country you're in, whether you're worried about the government or you're worried about a company. Now, in a lot of countries, both East and West, when you look at the government and you look at the companies, it's hard sometimes to actually tell where one begins and the other ends. So let me say then the fear is that some entities should get to have control of the web.
And this might be an avaricious corporation, it could be a benign government that's even incompetent, misusing data, it could be criminals as well. There's a wide range of potential.
So there is a wide range, and of course there's stuff happening. So I suppose if you look at the things that happen in some Middle Eastern countries, that the web is completely monitored, and even though some of them there's a lot of censorship, some countries there's actually not so much censorship because they let you go to whatever website you like and they just watch. There was an attack by one government on its citizens in which they managed to get all their social networking passwords and just then they could log on as a person and find out who all their friends were. So they could rapidly find out who the dissidents were, and those dissidents could be rounded up and would disappear all at the same time. So if you're spying on the net, then that's an extremely powerful tool as a government. Meanwhile, commercially, then lots of people are worried about the fact that there have been trials, for example, in this country, where BT did a trial with a company called Form, with a PH, where they put in equipment that would just look at every web page, look at the URL of it, and record it, and then just look at all the text coming back and just keep a profile of all the words. So that for your household, they would have a profile of all the words which were looked at on the web by people in your household. And they were going to use that. So they're going to sell that information to advertisers. But, you know, can you imagine what an incredible, accurate profile, like, you know, what incredibly sensitive information could be revealed in a way by that. So there are lots of failure modes. Some of them are small. Some of them are small in which just, you know, you've paid for internet connection and you're trying to watch a movie, and and meanwhile your internet service provider has currently has a good deal on its own movies, and so they slow down the packets coming from the other movie supplier just to give you an extra incentive to go and watch theirs. You know, that's commercial. That's just being sneaky commercially. It's you know, it's messing up the internet market. So, you know, that's what we call net neutrality, and that's that sort of thing is we talk about. You know, the web shouldn't, the net shouldn't discriminate. It should be neutral. That happens in really quite civilized countries.
And who do you find is it the corporations and governments are most resistant to that kind of net neutrality? Who do you find objects most, stands in the way?
I think, well, it's the large, it's the companies which are large internet service providers who feel that if they've got enough power in the market, if they've got, for example, they've got enough people that signed up as clients who don't really have another option, either who won't switch because it's so difficult to switch to a different internet service provider, or actually they don't really there isn't really another one. Which in case a lot of people in the States, for example, they've only really got one person they can go to. So imagine that so it's the large companies who think, now, if we start to spy on them, if we start to control, if we can control where they buy their stuff, you know, we've got it made. Yeah, we can spy on them and we can give them really incredibly insightful advertising because we know exactly, by reading their email, we know exactly what they're looking for. But in fact, we can even, you know, we can start blocking them going to competitive sites. We can start to make sure, basically, we and our partners will be their complete online experience. We will basically, we will effectively be able to control where they spend their money, and actually, you know, we'll be able to control who they vote for, and we'll be able to control who they buy their drugs from, and we'll be able to control which diseases they think they have. And so, you know, so if we can't sell them a drug, well, maybe we'll persuade them they have a different disease. So, you know, you can imagine that, you know, the idea, so that the value to a corporation of being able to completely control its customer is huge, just as the value to a government, a repressive government, of being able to completely control its people through information is huge. It's a constant temptation, and we just have to, you know, weed people. Anybody who uses the web, basically, you have to spend a certain amount of your time, a certain amount of your life, just looking out to make sure that, you know, fighting to keep it open.
And there are formal steps being taken, and I want to focus on these now. I know you've called for a Magna Carta. It's interesting because we know that next year is the 800th anniversary of our Magna Carta, and only 3 clauses, incidentally, of the Magna Carta, the original one, still exist, but it clearly has defined in so many people's minds how it is that one imposes controls. At that stage, it was King John who was all-powerful, and now the notion, I suppose, that we have governments and major corporations potentially having great power that needs to be curbed. So the thinking behind the Magna Carta for the digital world, where have you got to in that project?
Well, the idea is that, you know, here we are, we thought we'd use the 25th anniversary of the web, we'd use this as a sort of marker year to get everybody thinking about the openness of the net as more than they would have done before. We planned that before Snowden. Okay, so there's been there's been a number of things which sort of heighten the awareness of it. Anyway, but obviously when you get everybody in the world, you can't just do it within one country because so much of the web is basically it's not a nationful thing. The web exists basically irrespective of nations. So you've got to do it. You've got to do it internationally. And as you derive these values, you derive these principles, which are similar in some ways to a lot of things like the United Nations rights, human rights. Then as you derive them, then you'll have to do it in a way which is fairly sort of broad, because it's got to apply irrespective of which country you're in. You can't use country-specific terms. You've just got to talk about the right to be able to communicate without interference. And then that, for me, I think is sort of part one, is phase one. And phase two, which can happen at the same time, but basically as we have this global feeling about global agreements and about the principles, then within each jurisdiction, each country, you actually have to think completely differently, separately. You have to really then knuckle down in the UK and say, all right, so these are, we've had this discussion. We know that these are the important principles. How are we going to make sure that this happens in the UK? In the UK, we have GCHQ. Nobody else has a GCHQ. So we have to build stuff around GCHQ which will allow people to trust the United Kingdom on the internet again. Okay, and just as the US are going to build people around SA, US builds rules about what laws Congress is allowed to make. We don't have a Congress. We have to. So in each country, the legal system is different, and the structures of government and the commercial structures are different. So when you actually implement these ideas, then it has to be done country-specific.
So the Magna Carta in some ways was more like what was the Universal Declaration in 1948 of human rights, to which people didn't need to sign up. It was a declaration of what was held to be morally appropriate principles and so forth, as opposed to the European Convention, which you had to ratify, and it was a treaty. But the Bill of Rights is each individual country's implementation of that. Now, is the thinking behind this that the law and regulation as it stands just now is sufficient, it's just not well enough understood, so we need to express it more clearly? Or is it that you feel there are many areas, privacy, confidentiality, intellectual property, and so forth, where our legislature's understanding of these issues is not yet sufficient, and we really need to lobby for better regulation, better law? So you're worried about our current legal systems as they are and want to present this in a more coherent form? Or do you actually want to ignite a whole debate about individual and particular areas?
All the above.
Yeah.
In other words, it's difficult to generalize, because you've got all these different issues, like spying and blocking and pricing and so on, and then you've got different countries. And different countries are in different states. In some cases, so for example, in Brazil, they have a Marco Civil Internet. They have gotten together, they've crowdsourced a discussion about what the principles are, and the principles have been put through Parliament, and they were just signed recently into law by the President. So they've got, so that they've had a big national discussion. They've got a lot of discussion, they've got a lot of understanding in the electorate, they've got understanding among the elected. They've got a lot of pushback from some big industry that would love to be able to find a way to sneak around that stuff or get it changed. But so they've got a good ongoing discussion. In general, in most countries, there's typically people who write the laws are people who have gotten a certain amount of experience, and they've got a certain amount of age, and they don't necessarily understand all the bits and bolts of how really what's possible on the internet. So I think clearly we need, so certainly I'd, by the way, put in a plug, learn to code, teach our children to code, get to them. We need lots of people learning to code, not just because we need more programmers, but because we need lawyers, and we need more people in Parliament, and we need and people in government agencies who, because they have got they've got their programmer badge, because they've actually done some. They actually understand what's possible. They understand which things about the web are fundamental and which things about it are arbitrary. Because where they look at something and it's fundamental the way the web works, then they can't. Then where it's arbitrary, then they could actually enact laws and ask the technologists to change it.
So what I'm hearing is that you want a global statement that articulates the principles of a healthy web, and debate on that, what should be involved in that statement. And I think there's an idea of crowdsourcing that and encouraging a global discussion of the issue. And then individual jurisdictions, we need legislatures to be better informed of the experience you're mentioning and taking account of their own local institutions and their own local principles to implement a version of that.
Yes.
And interestingly, this week, both the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats, actually, Labour Party expressed an interest in the Magna Carta, Liberal Democrats in Bill of Rights. There is, I think, as we speak, more debate and discussion than there ever has been. Now, for this conference, there, as I understand it, there was a little bit of research undertaken to give a flavour of people's attitudes towards a digital Bill of Rights. So the question that was asked was as follows: the internet is now vital to many aspects of life today. Do you think there should be a digital Bill of Rights that spells out online rights and responsibilities in areas such as surveillance, security, and hate speech? Or are existing laws still good enough to manage? That was the question. 57% said there should be a digital Bill of Rights. 24% said existing laws are good enough, and 19% of people said they don't know. And before I ask you to respond on this, I just want to make the observation that, of course, in the United Kingdom, we don't have a normal Bill of Rights, still less a digital Bill of Rights, nor do we have a constitution. So my guess is if you asked that in a country that did have a constitution or a Bill of Rights, their response would be rather different. I think many more would actually support a Bill of Rights, would be my speculation. And whether or not a digital Bill of Rights in this country would stimulate, as there's quite a lot of constitutional theorists now calling for a regular Bill of Rights, I do not know. But does that 57% in favour surprise you in the UK, or is that something that you would have expected?
It doesn't surprise me at all. No, I think that there is there's lots of public awareness of the issues. Obviously, in a way, Snowden has skewed a lot of the public discourse because the Snowden revelations were so dramatic that everybody is thinking about the failure, the particular way in which the internet can fail, in that it is spied on by a government agency. And coupled to that, some spying sort of helped by commercial agencies, but all the other ways in which your internet, the companies can abuse you, they're also important as well. So I think in a way, the benefit of having the Snowden revelations, which were I think really interesting and opened lots of conversations which otherwise we wouldn't be having. Obviously, that is the good side. The difficulty is now when you ask people about the internet, they tend to just think they just think about the spying, government spying, and we have to remind them that there are other ways, other things we have to protect against too.
Which leads to the second question that was asked in the research, which was as follows. Over the last year, there have been many revelations about violations of privacy and about governments around the world routinely monitoring what we do online. Would you say you trust the web less than a year ago because of this, or has it made no difference? And if that's a less, is it a lot less or a little yes? So 17% of people said, in light of the last year's violations, they trust the web a lot less. 23% say they trust it a little less. 52% said it made no difference, and 8% said they don't know. That's quite a chunk, actually. 40% saying their trust has diminished because of these revelations. On the other hand, the revelations were fairly remarkable.
Yes, although trust the web is, when people use the word trust,
I don't want to be blamed for the question.
Yes, right.
No, I understand that. I think it gives a flavour, though, of public opinion, and public opinion seems to be calling here, at least, for greater clarity about what their entitlements are. And often, in my experience, when people are interested from their children's point of view, what their rights and responsibilities are. And also, I think people are unsettled when they get a sense from the news about surveillance just how powerful some technologies and institutions in combination can be.
Clarity, I think, is an important word there. That, yes, I think people do want clarity. That to a certain extent, the web has grown up to 25 based on an internet which was pretty open. You know, it was pretty unregulated. That was pretty good. And it allowed it to thrive because it was decentralized, because there was no central point of control anyway, so that we didn't have to have some sort of governmental authority running that point of control. But now, for people to actually commit to, for example, building a business on the web, in a way, you need clarity. The rules have been, having the rules sort of implicit, and being argued about every year isn't so good. What we need to do is to write them down so that people know where they are. They know, if I pay money for an internet connection, then I am going to be able to connect to whoever I want. Otherwise, I'll be able to sue my internet service provider, and on the basis of that, I will build a business here. Or when I build a business here, I will be able to make the following promise about the security of the data to my customers, because I know that I've got that the police will only be able to demand the data under these very, very well understood circumstances, coming in with a court order with a warrant from something from a judge. The clarity, I think that clarity is going to be important for people and very important for businesses too.
We also want a higher quality of public debate. I remember in the early 80s when test tube baby technology was coming through, Mary Warnock, the great philosopher, was asked to investigate into the ethical implications of all sorts of new developments and related developments. And what followed actually was remarkable upsurge of interest, the popular press and the academic community. And one I would hope for, from what you're saying, is that if you start a debate, less about the digital Bill of Rights, funnily enough, but more about the higher level principles, it would be wonderful to have a higher quality of debate and discussion about the issues involved, because very polarized just now, so many of the discussions, as so many people note, people who are hugely in favor of the technology, defensive of any new developments, and those who are extremely negative. So that between the dystopian and the utopian versions of all of this, there must be a sensible line that we need to debate, I would have thought. So you were thinking about the crowdsourcing notion, just a little bit about that, how it is you can, and this is what I'm talking about, public debate, how we can engage and involve many people around the world. What's your latest view on that?
Well, with this festival we're launching, and so if you go to the website, you'll find that sort of you'll find the or look at or look for follow the Twitter hashtag. This Web We Want Festival and hash Web We Want, and you'll find pointers to things going on. There is, we're not going to just have one debate where there's going to be masses of them. So this is one place where people are discussing it. It's great that Southbank have, thank you, Jude and company, for putting on a festival about it here. That sort of thing is brilliant. So people obviously, different parts of the world are having different sorts of debate. The ask is, for example, if you have a conference which is kind of related because it's about human rights, then add a bit on the web. If you've got a conference about the web, add a bit on human rights. If you're wondering about doing a workshop or a TEDx or something, then hey, how about using this year being part of this discussion? Just get if a newspaper, keep an eye on what's going on. So basically. It's a fairly sort of loose discussion. There's coordinated, if you go to the Web Foundation website and follow links, webfoundation.org, you can follow links to where things are happening. But really, crowdsourcing means, I think, first, a lot of brainstorming, a lot of discussion about which values are most important, particularly when you have to have when you have to have trade-offs. And then how we continue, then maybe we'll get together some experts who will understand how to draw up the sort of language we want, who will be able to look at everything that can, look at the stuff which has come through Twitter, look at the stuff which has come out of those workshops, and then try to frame some ideas. Maybe we'll end up with one piece of text. Maybe we'll end up with 10. Maybe we'll end up with two competing ones, which we just get, But in a way, the main important thing is to feel that we've really sort of heard from everybody. One thing the Web Foundation has been doing has actually been polling people to, who don't, who are not necessarily accessible online, to ask them what they think. So we don't have just a discussion amongst the people who are sort of crazy internet nuts.
Well, back to that in 2 seconds about the extent of internet and web usage, but just to stress, I think this event itself is a great focal point for a lot of the discussion, certainly here, but for people who are listening this evening in the hall as well as watching online, the website that you mentioned is a great starting point to immerse yourself in some of the key issues. But I didn't want to rewind because I was asking you about your worries, and I suppose there's another more fundamental worry that you might have. Tell us just a little about the context of your tweet in the opening ceremony of the Olympics, because that became one of the best known tweets, what it was you tweeted and what you had in mind, because it seems to me it relates to the issue that currently 40% of humanity are web users, which is amazing, but you worry about the 60%.
So a tweet is pretty short, particularly when you've got to fit it onto the LEDs that are built into the seats of the stadium of the Olympics. So it just said, "This is for everyone." And
this is for everyone.
The tweet was, "This is for everyone," and it was in a way there's a bit of a pun there. In that, yeah. So there's two pieces. One is that actually less than half the world actually have access to it. One of the things the Web Foundation is among the organizations concerned about that. How can we get people up to speed as quickly as possible? How can we, like with the Affordable Internet Consortium, there's for E4AI, there is a push to try to reduce the cost of getting your first sort of web-capable device and web-capable data connection. So getting lots of people online is part of it, but also web is for everyone, meaning also it's about fairness, it's about justice for the people who are connected. This is for anybody who wants to publish. This is for anybody who wants to read. It's about a non-discrimination plea that the web should remain this open, neutral medium.
As to the 40%, 60%, are you more excited by the 40% than worried about the 60%, or is a lot of your preoccupation to try and edge the number of users up? I remember in the mid-90s, Nicholas Negroponte wrote in his book, Being Digital, he predicted there'd be 1 billion users of the web. And people at the time said he was completely unhinged, and there was absolutely no question of this coming about. So it is just entirely remarkable. We're creeping towards 3 billion in 2014. Yeah. But it is a concern. I was speaking to someone earlier saying less than 2% of people in Ethiopia, for example, are web users, less than 17% in Africa. That's a huge challenge as well, isn't it?
It isn't. But one of the things which certainly the web consortium and the technical community realized a while ago was that mobile was the way to get, was going to be very important. So yes, the mobile web is not just for, it started off as being for a lot of people. It seemed to be the things that sort of executives who could afford these new fancy smartphones could use, but in fact it's also the only way that for a lot of people are going to be able to afford to get on it in African villages. So but the mobile web actually, is it's ticking off. Mobile web penetration is increasing dramatically. So if you like, we've got this sort of exponential growth, and it's going up and up. Now, as you go through 50-50, then that means that you're sort of changing your concerns. So in fact, right now, I'm not really worried about the deployment of the large numbers of mobile phones with web capacity across a lot of the world, because you can look at the curve. It's happening.
It's moving in the right
perhaps
direction.
it's fasting, but obviously there's on your way to 100%, the thing is going to start sloping off. And so then this interesting area, like the area that Martha Lane Fox has focused on this country, is okay. Then when we've got when we've got 80%, then the last 20% will be maybe a much more difficult problem. Difficult problem because they're just hard to get to in some cases. Difficult problem because they're actually in a country where the government has decided that no way is anybody getting any of that kind of that communications connectivity in there. Otherwise, we will be found out. So there will be the difficult places, and in a way, the effort which it's going to take in order to get that the last billion online is going to be much greater, very different sorts of challenges, really interesting challenges, maybe using different technologies, tackling different problems. So I think that's really, I think we'll watch how this happens. We'll try to make it happen faster rather than slower. That's what the E4AI initiative is about. But I don't think it's going to stop.
And in some ways, I suppose in this country, 78, 79, 80%, most people think it's going to level out as well. So what you say, perhaps applying globally, is we're seeing reflected already in countries that have been relatively early adopters. Before we take the Twitter questions, I just wanted to raise a slightly different issue, and that was about public data sets. And I want to use this as a little bit of a case study for a way in which you have personally brought about a vast change in government policy. Because I know that some people listening will think it's almost impossible to turn back tides, to change the directions of governments and major corporations. But as was mentioned in the introduction by Jude, for 5 years I chaired a Quango, which was focusing on the reuse of public sector information. And with all the will in the world, we found it very hard to make any difference at all. But then you and Nigel Shadbolt took over, and I think it was Gordon Brown, the Prime Minister, was very supportive. And I think also that you even presented to the Cabinet on the issue. But there was an area where we went from government departments and local authorities being very reluctant to make their data sets available to it being actually commonly accepted now. And you did that in about 2 or 3 years. I wondered if you wanted to reflect on that.
Well, I think definitely a case of standing on the shoulders of giants. So with some of the arguments we had, we were aware of the fact that maybe you've been in those rooms before making arguments and not succeeding. I suppose there was a crucial lunch at Chequers where I was sitting down next to Gordon Brown, who was Prime Minister at the time, and he spent the first half of the meal, as one does, talking to the person on the other, on his right, who was Bill Clinton. And then, so when the change of food came around, he turned to me, as one does, and he said, "So, okay, Tim, if you could choose, what should the UK do to make the best use of the internet?" And I said, "You should put all the government data online." And he said, "All right, let's do that." And you said for 5 years trying to push, sort of pushing this thing uphill, like pushing on a locked door, trying to get people to agree, and then suddenly you find you're pushing on a door which is sprung open, and you feel you're going to fall flat on your face. So, so an important part of it was the Prime Minister saying, "Yes, we're going to do that." Now, then, of course, within the civil service of this country, which is a wonderful, I'll think of a good name. It's a wonderful thing, which is a wonderful
you have to find an
institution. It has, there were people within the civil service who'd always had their eye on this. The people who'd been involved in previous pushes, who'd figured out, understood what had worked and what hadn't worked. There were people who had data, which they thought, this stuff should all be online. It would just be so useful to other people. Why am I sitting on it? And so putting together with those people who had the data, a few people had, just a very small number of people who understood the technology. And there was this little team put together by the Cabinet Office of people who put up a website just like that, with open source software. And so it was a sort of operation that went really delightfully, smoothly. And so I was really impressed with the way the Cabinet Office managed to put that together and put the UK suddenly in a very leading position when it comes to open data.
I think it's a great case study, as I say, how major change can come about relatively quickly. I think it's time now for the Twitter questions. And what's been happening, I'm hoping people in the audience...
We still have to keep pushing for open data, mind you. We're not there.
People will have
we got lots of good open data out there. There's lots of open data in government, which still needs to be...
Well, there's a lot here. I'm not sure which have come from within the audience and which have come from home. So we might have a little bit of a shout-out if it's you. So I'll read out the question, and then I'll read out the name, and if you want to own up, you can shout out. So how can we use the web more effectively to enhance democracy and democratic institutions? And that's Tracy Green. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tracy. Great question, actually. How can we? I think it's really, really important. At the end of the day, we've got this communication medium. The web is supposed to be a platform. So in other words, you can build on it whatever you like. So people build all kinds of things. People have built, auctions and Airbnb but actually we have a dire need to be able to have a more efficient democracy. We need to have sort of more informed debate. We need to find the people who understand stuff and get them to talk about it, and to have a way of recognizing who they are and giving them a certain amount of say. Do we want a sort of meritocracy there? Do we need more? Should we have those people? Should those people be elected? If you imagined, that the current way that democracy is largely put together is through sort of parishes and towns and small areas being the place where people spend a lot of time, and then being grouped together geographically. So the whole thing is all based on geographic structures, which is pretty useful, particularly when you're getting around the country on a horse. But now actually, when you can send email, you can have completely non-geographic structures. So now you could have, instead of having a council which is going to look at everything in Pevensey, you could have a council which is going to look at potholes. And so you could have a consumer pothole council which will look at all the unfixed potholes across Britain, maybe connect to their international counterparts, just made up of people who are really interested in getting the roads fixed, and just talking only to the people whose job it is to fix the roads, for example. So basically, yes, I think we can build systems which break outside the hierarchy, which leave the hierarchical structure because it's got an important value, but build more complex, more interconnected structures where, when you're involved, when you're working on a problem you've got, so you're reporting in more than one direction. Building the way some of these things get called multi-stakeholder sometimes. So multi-stakeholder organizations or things. That's the way the internet is generally governed. The way things like the WCC, the Web Consortium, it's a multi-stakeholder organization. All kinds of things. People and organizations affiliate with it, and it liaises with other multi-stakeholder organizations. Maybe we can use that sort of idea for building a more complex, more web-like, more interconnected governance structure. I think we should do it bit by bit. I don't think we should turn over, but we should really experiment with things that are more connected and of course get people, ordinary people, very involved.
Thank you, Tracy. Here's a second one. What is a better solution to mass surveillance, universal encryption, or political change? And that's David Carroll. Is David with us? Seems to be quite a few David Carrolls in the audience. Thank you, David, in any event. This is not a 10-second answer.
Okay. So for the first 2 hours of this answer, I'm going to... So what's the best solution to go to
Mass
government?
surveillance, is it universal encryption or political change?
All the above.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that we need to have political change because we need to build in a sort of accountability. We need to build in a sort of sense in the British system that which is common in the US system, but not so much here, that there are checks and balances, that where you have power, then you have an opposing power, a balancing power, something which can check on the other one. How do we build that sort of thing for GCHQ? That's going to be quite a challenge, but I think we need to do it. Universal encryption, I think we need to make encryption tools available, and we need to get people using encryption in general, because at the moment, because never mind about government encryption, just criminal snooping, if you're trying to attack somebody, if you're trying to break into somebody's computer system, typically you often do it through a person. You do it through a person by sending what's called a spear phishing mail. It's a phishing mail, an attempt to sort of trick somebody into thinking that you're somebody else, which has been, it's a spear phishing because it's been targeted at somebody, and you target somebody by looking at their email. And you look at their email because it's going across the net unencrypted. So that's one reason. I think there are lots of reasons why there's a general feeling in the internet community that we should move to encryption everywhere by default. HTTPS everywhere is one push. You should be using secure HTTP rather than just plain HTTP. Also, I use PGP email, which is why I can send encrypted email and receive encrypted email from people who also use PGP. Recommend you go and look up PGP. Get your friends using it. And people, the people you're working with on sort of sensitive things, make sure the HR department use it. So yeah, I think both.
Thank you. And here's forgive my pronunciation in a second of the name, but why is decentralization important for the future of the web, and how should it be done? I think I read somewhere you talked about re-decentralization as something. I think you wrote about this in Wired. But this is a question from, again, forgive me, Niels 10 Over, or Uver. Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, so why is decentralization important for the web? Decentralization was very important for the internet early on because it allowed me to just plug in my computer, write a web browser, write a web server, give them to other people, and those web browsers and web servers would talk to each other across the internet without me asking anyone. The permissionless world where there's no central control, there's nobody, you have to register a new application, no way you have to register a new protocol. So similarly, now no, you don't have to register a new website. Well, you have to get a domain name, and we could talk for hours about the issues with the domain name system as being a form of centralization. But I think a lot of people now, when they look at the actual use of the web, that some people are concerned about the fact that a lot of people, when they go and actually connect to the web, they only go to one website, and they sit there for a long time. They have a lot of fun there, they connect to their friends there, but they're not experiencing the whole open web. The things that they do there add value to that particular social network, and there are a bunch of social networks which are popular in different countries. But the issue is that they're not being part of the big, creative, horrible, gooey mass of thriving, throbbing humanity, just blogging and criticizing and generally being sort of collaborating across the web. So people feel that there's also an issue for me. I tend to do things on the open web rather than very much in sort of limited social networking silos, because I find that they collect a great amount of data about me and about which photos I'm in and so on, and that's valuable data to them, but I don't have use of it. So when I'm running my programs, if I'm running a photo management program on my computer, then it's not got all that data. It's all that information is up there. I don't get the benefit of it. So I think for me, actually, I believe that the value of my data has got much more value to me than to anybody else. So re-decentralizing the web is about taking down those silos or building new world in which actually there aren't those silos where, for example, when I can store my stuff at home, I can store my photos at home, I can store them on a computer at home which is actually on the web, which I control completely. Maybe I can, maybe my employer, maybe my alma mater, maybe my university will give me some web space to play with just because it wants to keep track of me, and it's a good thing to do. So I have web space in different places where I can store stuff, and in the future, and I can choose to use different applications to run over that data, but there's no silo, and I get the benefit of being able to actually access all the data which I've used, all my photo data, or my fitness data, or all my financial data, all the different aspects of my life, I can all see together. And if you like somebody running a company, a CEO of a company needs to be able to look at all the data of the company, and they just demand that. They bring in people to do enterprise integration. So enterprise information integration is a well-known, important thing for a company. Personal data information is something which I think is coming, and so that's one of the reasons why we need to re-decentralize the web.
Our time has run out, I'm afraid, but I wanted to end by making a date with you, maybe, that imagine that we can both assemble here in 25 years' time. We'll probably be digitally enhanced, but we're both keen runners, so hopefully we'll still be up and running in 25 years. But when we get together in 25 years, I want to replay this last bit of footage, as it were, of our discussion. And I'm going to ask you just one question. In 25 years' time, looking back in terms of the web you want, what single feature would make you most happy to see in retrospect? So sitting here, looking forward 25 years and then back 25 years, and I suppose this is really what your supertanker worry is. What would give you greatest satisfaction in 25 years' time?
So I think the fact that we can look back over the 25 years and seen that the web has really played a role as an independent, neutral medium, like the press. Now we can look back at the way the role the press has played in every democracy. It's been really important to have a press independent of government. The independence of the press has been important every now and again. It's not always been perfect, but it's been a really important principle. It's a principle that we teach kids in primary school. So I hope that in 25 years we will look and we'll see that now kids are taught that the independence of the internet infrastructure, independence of the web, as a neutral, unbiased medium, is something which is crucial, something which not only is something which is important and was something which they've been taught to fight for, but also something where they can look back over those 25 years and see, yes, it has played its role. The fact that we have, look back to times when the neutrality of the web has allowed us to escape from being corralled into places where we're being tricked into believing untruths, to where the independence of the web has allowed new social structures to spring up and challenge the ones, to challenge broken ones, to trace the one, to look back and see where the independence of the web has allowed us to create new, competing and slowly enhanced, really more powerful, more collaborative styles for government, where it's allowed us to do fantastic scientific collaboration as well and solve huge medical problems and so on. So that's what I hope
I look forward to discussing it then. Two thank yous. One, thank you for speaking so freely and inspiringly this evening. And the second thank you, above all else, is to thank you for inventing the World Wide Web. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, Richard.
So please join us tomorrow, and all of the compatriots of Tim. There's opportunities tomorrow to have your say, forming the Magna Carta. Don't leave it all to Tim.